Hi, I'm Allison DeJager with List Self Storage. For those of you who don't know, List Self Storage is a platform for buying and selling self storage properties. We have roughly 240 to 50 listings on the site right now, and we add more every day. So today we're chatting with David Allen from Apple Self Storage. David, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So we'll go right in for it. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in the industry.
Sure. Apple Self Storage is a family owned and operated company. It's my father, my two uncles, and myself. And we started in 1999 in proper, and I joined up with the company about 8 years ago. And Yeah, we currently have 37. 30, we own and operate 37 facilities, which is about 2 million square feet of self storage in Ontario, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. So that's Ontario and Maritimes, Canada. So we own and we do a little bit of third party management as well.
Cool. So can you chat about the state of the market in Canada and some of the key differences you've noticed when compared to the US?
Yeah, for sure. So Canada is a different market. I mean, I know a lot of people think that it's just like a little U.S., but it's actually very different. Canada, for example, has 35 million people, which is about the same population as California, and that population is spread out through a few sort of denser population areas. Like I mean, like the top five markets, like Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. But then the rest of the population, it drops off very quickly after that. So we have a lot of very small markets. Like the 10th largest city in Canada has like 300,000 people. Um, so with our population, with being spread out over such a large area, the distribution of self storage facilities also differs. Across Canada, we have about 2,000 self storage facilities, give or take. And these the larger of these self storage facilities are obviously based in the major city centers, but the ownership of the facility counts and the square footage differ greatly. So, I mean, for example, the top five operators, which is Access and Storage Mart and U-Haul and us and some of these other guys, we own about 500 facilities across Canada. The top five operators. So, and the local operators own about 1,200 facilities. But the way that breaks down in the real square footage is the top five operators, they own about 28 million square feet of self storage, and the local mom and pops own about 25 million square feet. So the top five operators actually own more square feet than the rest of the operators combined, which that is contrary to what a lot of people talk about when they talk about the Canadian industry, because a lot of people say that the Canadian industry is really ripe for these roll ups. But what they don't realize is the type of roll ups that they're talking about. I mean, the balance of the square footage of the facilities who aren't owned by the top five operators, the average facility is 21,000 feet. So it makes it difficult when you have lots of small facilities spread out over a very, very large geographic area with very small population densities. So it just means that, I mean, development is very difficult because it has to be done in the city centers, and that's getting very, very crowded. And then I mean, the other big difference is kind of the tax implications of Canada, right? I mean, Canada is much more um, uh, tax friendly. So we have these things called development charges, and I mean, this is something I talk about fairly regularly with people who aren't familiar with the Canadian market. But the tax, like these development charges in Canada, is literally a tax that you get nothing for. You get the right to develop, and these things can range. I mean, these days they're up to like $43-$44 per square foot just for the right to be able to build a self storage facility. So if you're building a 100,000 square foot facility, I mean, you might be paying $4 million in tax just to be able to build the property. And so these are the things that, I mean, a lot of people look at Canadian markets and they say, oh, Canadian markets are, they're such strong markets, right? I mean, based on the Canadian dollar. I mean, Toronto, for example, the average rate per square foot is like $44 a foot, right? Which is not far off of New York. But the difference is that, the cost to build, first of all, like, it's going to be 140, 150 bucks, and that's not including land, which is averaging out at like $6 or $7 million per acre, like in Toronto. So it's like you have very, very expensive development, partly because of the taxes and partly because of the currency exchange rate and a bunch of other things. So we have to charge a lot on a per square foot basis. So on a dollar to dollar basis, it's not underdeveloped. It's actually, yeah. So it's very comparable to a lot of U.S. markets.
That's really interesting. I'm glad you touched on the population distribution too, because I always find that so interesting, especially like during market selection. Um, what trends are you seeing right now, and what do you see looking forward? And I know like this is frozen in time, June 8th, 2021. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so I get it. We're not going to hold you accountable for anything you say that's wrong.
What are we seeing? So we're seeing a lot of development happening in like urban markets, and so in a lot of the markets that we look at and a lot of the markets that we're tracking, I mean, we're seeing the square foot per capita rise to like 12 and 15 square feet per capita, which I know that probably doesn't sound like a lot for a lot of the US markets, but I mean, for us, that's a lot. And especially because a lot of that product is coming on board at the same time, right? Like we've been tracking these things, over the last, a couple of years, and they're all going to be opening roughly at the same time. So we're, in a lot of markets, the actual available square footage, could be potentially doubling, all within sort of a matter of months of one another. So we're going to have a lot of product coming online. So I fully expect there to be some downward pressure on rates. That being said, it's also happening at a pretty good time because, in a lot of markets that we operate in, we're in record low vacancies, right? So I mean, our facilities are all full, and all of our competitors' facilities are full. But I think that's just a lot of pent up demand from from this very strange past year, right? I mean, over the course of the past year, people didn't move out because they weren't able to, because I mean there was a stay at home order, and so. And then everybody else, all those typical life things kept happening, right? I mean, people kept, needing storage for the D's, right? I mean, death, disaster, divorce, dislocation, all those different things. So yeah, so I think it's going to be. I mean, I think it's going to be a very good year coming up, but I do see a correction on the horizon.
That makes sense. Yeah. Before we close out, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Um, Anything else I wanted to add? Yeah, I think the one thing when people talk about Canada, Canada's typically talked about as a single market, and I think that's flawed thinking. I think that people talk about coming to Canada, which is great. I mean, great. I mean, it's great to come to Canada because it's a very similar market to the U.S. and similar regulatory system and tax systems, and very stable sort of economic base and all those things. But the differences of coming to, so for example, Toronto to Maritimes Canada to Vancouver, all those different provinces. I mean, they're basically different states. I mean, that's the way that you could think about them. So they have very different. They do have very different tax laws. They have different employment laws, right? I mean, so for example, in New Brunswick, for example, it is incredibly difficult to actually fire somebody. I mean, you can basically not fire somebody, and I mean, I'm being a little bit, I mean, you can, but it's so difficult that it's actually better to not,
Wow.
in a lot of situations. And so when people talk about coming to Canada and they say like, well, we'd like to come to, wherever the market will take us, understanding that Canada is made up of many different markets, and so it's not just coming to Canada. It would be going to Ontario, because Ontario would probably be the most similar to United States, or British Columbia, which is a little bit more left leaning. But yeah.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, everybody, for joining. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. It's my email is Alison, ALISON, at listselfstorage.com. And then my phone number is 248-795-8126. Thanks. Bye.